Okay, picture this. What if the biggest villain in your life isn't some external enemy, but like a secret agent operating silently inside your own head?
A cognitive sleeper cell.
Exactly. Something that influences almost every decision you make.
Mm.
Who you hire, who you trust, even how you react to, say, a news story.
Well, that internal agent, it's real. And it's what we're diving deep into today. Unconscious biases. We're talking about these pervasive hidden mental processes that really shape our judgments, often without us even knowing it,
Right, we're going beneath the surface of what people say they believe.
to look at what their brains actually do.
Absolutely.
Mm.
So our mission today is to unmask this silent puppet master. We've pulled together insights from, well, a massive amount of research, decades of work across cognitive psychology, social neuroscience, behavioral economics.
Organizational psychology, too. It's a huge field. And this isn't just academic curiosity, right? We're talking about fundamental mechanisms that shape everything from your personal choices all the way up to systemic discrimination in really critical areas. Healthcare, justice, jobs.
Yeah, big stuff.
And our sources, they give us a really comprehensive model of how this bias processing works. We'll get into the whole dual process theory, fast versus slow thinking, the actual brain wiring involved.
Neuroscience.
Exactly. And crucially, what the research says about the most effective ways to maybe counteract these biases. What actually works?
This is the shortcut, the deep dive to understanding those invisible forces operating inside all of us. So let's get started. Okay, first things first. We need to make a really key distinction here. When we talk about prejudice or bias, the science actually breaks it down into two very different types.
That's fundamental. You've got explicit biases on one hand. These are the attitudes, the stereotypes that you're consciously aware of. You can report them, you can control them. If someone asks you on a survey, do you hold discriminatory views? Your answer reflects that explicit bias.
And the good news, sort of, is that those explicit numbers, they've gone down significantly over the last 50 years or so, especially in Western countries.
Right. People are much less likely to openly say they hold prejudiced beliefs.
But, and this is the huge puzzle, what researchers call the persistence paradox.
Mm-hmm.
If people are consciously saying, yes, I believe in fairness, I believe in equality, why do we still see so much systemic discrimination in hiring, in healthcare, in lending? It persists.
And the answer seems to lie with the other kind of bias, the unconscious or implicit biases. These are the automatic attitudes, the associations that affect how we think and behave without us even realizing it.
So they operate outside our awareness.
Often completely outside, and here's the kicker. They frequently contradict our conscious values, the things we genuinely believe and say we stand for. It's like the difference between the moral compass you talk about and the autopilot program that's actually flying the plane day to day.
It's like having, I don't know, an operating system on your computer dedicated to fairness, but there's this invisible shadow program running in the background.
Yeah, exactly.
That overrides the fairness function when you're stressed or moving too fast. Where does that shadow program even come from? Is it hardwired?
No, it's not genetic. It's learned. It comes from just soaking in the culture around us. Social learning, repeated exposure to societal messages, stereotypes from media, family, school, you name it.
So just absorbing the patterns.
Pretty much. Over time, all that input gets deeply embedded in our cognitive architecture. It forms these super fast automatic associations, the kind that, well, System 1 loves.
Okay, so to really get how these automatic associations take over, we need to talk about this dual process model. Daniel Kahneman's work, right? System 1 and System 2 thinking.
Absolutely fundamental framework. It helps us understand the difference between, fast, intuitive thinking and slow, effortful thinking. If you're into Marvel, think of System 1 like Spider-Man's Spidey sense.
Okay, yeah. Fast, automatic, intuitive.
It's essential for those split-second decisions in a crisis, right?
Right. So System 1, the intuitive pilot, it operates quickly, almost effortlessly. It handles all the routine stuff by using mental shortcuts, heuristics.
And those shortcuts are incredibly useful. Imagine if you had to consciously analyze every single time you hit the brakes in your car or recognized a word you read. You'd be completely overwhelmed.
Total cognitive overload.
But here's the danger zone. Because System 1 is built for speed and efficiency, it's highly susceptible to systematic biases. That rapid categorization, that pattern recognition, it often relies on those culturally learned associations we just talked about.
So it makes automatic links.
Exactly. Often biased links between groups and attributes, like snap, judgment made, almost instantaneously and often riddled with errors based on those ingrained stereotypes.
Okay, so if System 1 is the impulsive spidey sense, what's System 2? The analytical strategist.
That's more like Tony Stark in his lab, meticulously calculating complex trajectories. System 2 is slow, deliberate, analytical. It takes conscious effort, attention.
That's when you're doing your taxes or really thinking through a complex problem, weighing options.
Precisely. Real critical thinking. It requires mental energy.
Now, I think the common assumption is that System 2's main job is just to swoop in and clean up System 1's messes, right? Like a fact checker after the gut reaction. But that sounds kind of inefficient.
It is, and actually, more recent research emphasizes something a bit more nuanced. It's not just about System 2 correcting System 1 after the fact. The most effective thinking happens when System 1 is smart enough to flag things appropriately to signal when System 2 needs to engage.
So System 1 sounds the alarm.
Kind of. It says, hold on, complex situation here, or warning. Implicit association detected that clashes with your stated goals. Engage the big guns System 2 analysis now. It's about that integration, that smooth handover when needed, not just constant correction. That's peak cognitive control.
Okay, let's move from the concept of two systems to the actual physical hardware, the brain stuff. If System 2 is the executive suite, what parts are actually monitoring for conflict and hitting the brakes?
This is where social neuroscience gets really interesting. For a long time, the spotlight was on the amygdala. It often gets tagged as the brain's simple fear center.
Right, the panic button.
Yeah, and early fMRI studies, they showed the amygdala lighting up, showing differential activation when people looked at faces from unfamiliar racial groups or groups associated with negative stereotypes.
So the initial thought was, aha, the brain is literally recoiling in fear from difference, and that's the source of bias.
That was the first take, yeah. But the crucial insight from more recent work, and this is a real shift, is that the amygdala's role is way more complex than just fear or prejudice. It seems to respond more to salience and cultural significance.
Okay, unpack salience and cultural significance for us. What does that mean neurologically?
It means the amygdala acts more like a quick relevance filter. It flags things that are culturally important, attention-grabbing, or just significant based on your learned experiences and cultural context. Good, bad, neutral doesn't matter. If a stimulus, like a face from a stereotyped group, is highly charged within your culture,
It gets flagged.
the amygdala flags it as salient, basically telling the rest of the brain, pay attention, this thing has meaning. So it's not necessarily driving the bias itself, but it's initiating an alert based on learned patterns. The real action, the control part, happens next, up in the prefrontal cortex.
Okay, that totally reframes it. It's less about innate fear and more like a cultural alert system saying, whoa, this image comes loaded with societal programming. So the alert goes off. Then what? Where does the control kick in?
That's the job of the prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive suite. Two key areas are crucial here for managing these alerts. First, you've got the anterior cingulate cortex, the ACC. Think of it as the brain's conflict monitor or error detector.
It spots the clash.
Exactly. It detects when there's a conflict between those lightning-fast implicit associations from System 1 and your explicit conscious goals or values. It's the internal alarm bell screaming, hey, that automatic thought you just had, it doesn't line up with the be fair rule you consciously believe in.
Okay, ACC detects the conflict. Who actually steps in to manage it, to make the change?
That's the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the DLPFC. This region is all about executive control. It actively helps us regulate our thoughts and align our behavior with our conscious intentions. It's the part that can pause System 1 and say, nope, let's engage System 2 analysis here. It's like the manual override button.
Got it. But we know these high-level control functions, they take energy, right? They're not free. So what happens when we're tired, stressed, overloaded, running low on cognitive fuel?
Yes, the crucial fatigue factor. The DLPFC in particular is really sensitive to resource depletion. When your cognitive load increases, maybe you're stressed, haven't slept, facing time pressure, or even just made a ton of decisions already that day.
Decision fatigue.
Totally. Think about how much easier it is to snap at someone or make a rash judgment at the end of a really long, hard day. Under those conditions, the control mechanisms in the prefrontal cortex become much less effective. The executive suite is running on fumes.
And then System 1 gets free rein.
Pretty much. It allows those unconscious biases to influence your behavior much more strongly, often without that crucial pause for correction or analysis from System 2. Stress and fatigue literally lower our defenses against bias.
Okay, so for decades, trying to measure something unconscious, something someone doesn't even know they have.
Yeah.
That was like the holy grail in psychology. How do you actually quantify a hidden bias.
It was a huge challenge. Then came the implicit association test, the IAT, developed by Anthony Greenwald and his colleagues, primarily at the University of Washington. It's now by far the most widely used tool for measuring unconscious bias.
And it's not just asking questions, right? It's cleverer than that.
Much clever. It's a computer-based task, and it looks deceptively simple. It measures the relative strength of the associations you hold between different concepts, say a social group like old people and an attribute like good or bad. And it does this by measuring your reaction times.
How does the reaction time part work? Walk us through it.
Okay, so you're sitting at the computer, and you have to rapidly sort words or images into categories using two keys, maybe the E key and the I key. In one block, you might press E for male names or career-related words, and I for female names or family-related words.
Okay.
Then, in another critical block, they flip the pairings. Now, you might press E for male or family, and I for female or career. The core logic is this. If you have a strong automatic unconscious association between, say, female and family, which is a common cultural stereotype.
Then you'll be much faster sorting them when they share the same key.
Exactly. You'll categorize them significantly faster and with fewer errors when the pairing matches your implicit association, female family on the same key, compared to when it conflicts female career on the same key. That difference in your reaction speed between the two blocks, that's your IAT score, reflecting the strength of that implicit link.
And here's the really mind-blowing part, the scale of this. Get this. Over 40 million IAT tests have been completed online through Project Implicit.
It's an absolutely massive data set, and it provides incredibly consistent findings.
What does it consistently find?
Well, on the race IAT, for example, something like 75% of participants, 3/4, consistently show an implicit preference for white people over black people. You see similar strong patterns for gender bias, age bias, bias related to sexual orientation.
75%, wow.
Yeah, and importantly, these implicit preferences often directly contradict what the participants explicitly say they believe about equality and fairness. It's powerful evidence that this shadow program is running in the background for most of us, regardless of our conscious intentions.
That number really hammers home that this isn't necessarily about individual bad apples or conscious malice. It's about absorbing the culture. But there's a big but, isn't there? The IAT faces some pretty significant criticism, especially about what it actually predicts.
Yes, this is a really critical point, and it's highlighted in major reviews like one in Psychological Science and the Public Interest. While IAT scores do seem to correlate with discriminatory behavior at the group level, so a group of people with higher average bias scores might show more biased outcomes overall.
Like judges and sentencing disparities, maybe?
Exactly. But an individual's IAT score turns out to be a pretty poor predictor of their specific individual discriminatory actions in a given situation.
So my personal IAT score can't reliably tell you if I'm going to, say, lowball a minority candidate in a job interview next Tuesday.
Correct. The predictive power at the individual level is weak, and this creates a huge disconnect, right? Because the IAT became the cornerstone of so much unconscious bias training in companies and institutions.
If it doesn't predict individual actions well, why use it for training individuals?
That's the million-dollar question. Critics argue maybe the IAT score reflects awareness of cultural stereotypes, knowing what the stereotypes are, rather than deeply held personal prejudice that drives behavior. The consensus emerging is that the IAT is a powerful diagnostic tool for societal-level bias, but maybe less useful for predicting or changing individual behavior moment to moment.
Okay, so we have the mechanism system 1 shortcuts and a tool to measure it, the IAT, with its strengths and weaknesses. Now let's look at the actual forms this bias takes, the usual suspects, let's say. We can group them into social identity biases and cognitive processing biases.
Right. Starting with social identity biases, these are based on group memberships. Race and gender biases are probably the most studied and notorious. On race, we consistently see those pro-white implicit preferences we mentioned, sometimes even among members of minority groups themselves, which really shows how pervasive the cultural messaging is.
And gender bias.
Yeah.
It's not just about who gets hired for what job, right?
Okay.
It runs deeper.
Oh, yeah. It shapes fundamental assumptions about competence, leadership potential, implicitly associating men more with career and leadership and women more with family or support roles. This obviously disadvantages women and gender minorities in professional settings. And then there's age bias, ageism.
Often overlooked, but powerful.
Very much so. It hits older workers and hiring assumptions about tech skills, adaptability, and it can tragically affect healthcare decisions too, with assumptions made based on age rather than individual condition.
Okay, now let's shift to the cognitive processing biases. These are more about the faulty mental shortcuts System 1 uses all the time, regardless of the social group involved. First up, confirmation bias. This one feels particularly relevant today.
It's huge. Confirmation bias is basically our tendency to seek out, interpret, and remember information in a way that confirms what we already believe. And, just as importantly, we tend to actively avoid, dismiss, or forget information that challenges our existing beliefs.
It's like building our own echo chambers.
Exactly. It makes us feel right, protects our worldview, but it also makes us resistant to changing our minds, even when the evidence is staring us in the face. It fuels polarization.
Then there's anchoring bias. Behavioral economists love this one.
They do, and for good reason. Anchoring is our tendency to over-rely on the very first piece of information we get, the anchor. That initial number or fact or impression exerts this massive gravitational pull on all our later judgments, even if the anchor itself was totally arbitrary or irrelevant.
Like the first price a salesperson throws out.
Classic example. Even if you negotiate way down, that initial high anchor makes the final price seem like a better deal than it might objectively be. In court, an initial high bail recommendation can subconsciously influence a judge's final sentencing, even if other factors suggest otherwise.
And the availability heuristic. This explains some of our irrational fears, right?
Definitely. We overestimate the likelihood of things that are easy to recall or particularly vivid in our memory. Think about plane crashes. They're rare, but they're incredibly dramatic and get huge media coverage.
So they stick in your mind.
Right, they're highly available. This makes many people fear flying much more than, say, driving, even though statistically driving is far riskier. But car accidents are common, less sensational, less available to our immediate recall.
Okay, let's bring this into the workplace because our sources highlight some specific biases that really mess things up there. Let's start with affinity bias.
Affinity bias is maybe one of the biggest culprits behind lack of diversity in teams. It's our natural tendency to gravitate towards and favor people who are similar to us, similar backgrounds, same school, same hobbies, maybe even look similar.
The like hires like problem.
Exactly. Hiring managers unconsciously rate candidates they feel a connection with more highly, overlooking potentially more qualified candidates who don't fit that same mold. It narrows the talent pool and stifles innovation.
And then we have the halo and horns effects. These sound almost biblical.
Hey, yeah. The halo effect is when one single positive trait, maybe a candidate, is really charismatic or went to a prestigious university, spills over and makes you view all their other qualities more positively, even unrelated ones like technical skill. You put a halo on them based on one thing.
And the horns effect
Is the exact opposite.
Yeah.
One negative thing, maybe they were 5 minutes late for the interview, or stumbled over one question casts a negative shadow, a horns effect, over your entire evaluation of them. It taints everything else, leading to an unfairly harsh judgment.
Finally, attribution bias. This sounds like how we explain away success and failure.
It is, and it's heavily influenced by group membership. We tend to attribute the successes of people in our own group, our in-group, to their inherent qualities. She succeeded because she's smart and hardworking, but we attribute their failures to external factors. He failed because he had bad luck or the circumstances were tough.
And for people in the out-group.
We flip it. Their successes. Oh, that was just luck or good timing or they got help. Their failures. See, that's due to their character flaws, lack of ability, lack of effort. It systematically distorts performance evaluations and how we assign credit or blame in the workplace. It protects the status quo.
Okay, so when these individual biases, affinity, attribution, anchoring, played out across thousands of decisions, day after day, they stop being just interesting quirks of the mind. They become engines of real-world systemic harm. Our sources paint a really stark picture here, starting with health. Hashtag tag A, healthcare disparities.
Yeah, the data in healthcare is frankly alarming. Study after study shows that healthcare providers, just like everyone else, hold implicit biases against certain groups, particularly racial minorities, LGBTQ+ individuals, patients who are overweight.
And this happens even when they consciously, explicitly reject prejudice and are committed to providing equal care.
Absolutely. It demonstrates System 1 overriding conscious values, especially in high-pressure medical environments.
So how does that implicit bias actually affect patients? What are the consequences?
They're concrete and measurable. It leads to differences in treatment recommendations, different patterns in prescribing pain medication, huge issue there, and just a lower quality of interaction, less empathy, less trust building.
Can you give a specific example?
Sure. There was a significant study published in the Journal of General Internal Medicine that looked at physicians' implicit racial bias scores. They found that doctors with higher pro-white implicit bias were statistically less likely to recommend appropriate, sometimes life-saving treatments for Black patients compared to white patients who had the exact same symptoms and medical profiles.
Wow. So an unconscious association held by the doctor could directly lead to a Black patient not getting the same standard of care as a white patient,
Right.
purely because of bias.
Precisely. The implicit assumption may be that the patient is less likely to adhere to treatment or is exaggerating symptoms or something else entirely unconscious translates into a tangible difference in care quality, which can have devastating consequences for health outcomes, pain management, even life expectancy.
And it probably extends to mental health, too.
Definitely. Cultural differences in how people express distress or describe symptoms can easily be misinterpreted through a biased lens. What's normal in one culture might be seen as pathology in another if the provider holds implicit biases, leading to misdiagnosis or inappropriate treatment plans, particularly for minority patients. System 1's quick, biased categorization can directly harm patients' well-being. #B criminal justice and education.
Now, shifting to criminal justice, an area where decisions are often made under intense stress, immense time pressure. The consequences seem terrifyingly clear.
They are. Research involving police officers, often using simulations, consistently finds strong implicit associations linking Black individuals with weapons or threat.
Even among officers who explicitly reject racial prejudice.
Yes. And crucially, this implicit association has been shown to lead to faster decisions to shoot in those simulation studies, particularly when the target is Black compared to white, even when the target is unarmed. This is that fatigue factor we talked about, potentially at its most lethal. Under pressure, the brain's control systems, like the DLPFC, falter, and that deeply ingrained implicit association can drive a split-second life-or-death decision.
And once someone enters the judicial system, those cognitive shortcuts like anchoring bias we discussed earlier, they continue to play a role.
Absolutely. There's clear evidence for anchoring effects in judicial decision-making. For example, the initial bail amount requested, or the first sentence recommendation proposed by a prosecutor, even if it's later shown to be arbitrary or based on questionable grounds, acts as a powerful anchor.
It pulls the final judgment towards it.
Exactly. Final sentencing decisions tend to cluster around that initial anchor, even when judges are consciously trying to disregard it and be impartial. System 1's reliance on that first piece of information heavily influences outcomes.
And in education, a system supposedly built on equal opportunity.
We see bias manifest there, too, often perpetuating inequality. Research consistently shows, for instance, that Black students tend to receive harsher disciplinary actions, suspensions, expulsions for the same behaviors compared to white students.
So it's not necessarily different behavior, but a biased interpretation or reaction to the behavior.
That seems to be a major factor. And beyond discipline, teacher expectations matter hugely. Teachers, like everyone, hold implicit biases. These can subtly influence their expectations for students from different backgrounds, how they interact with them in the classroom, the kind of feedback they give. Lower implicit expectations can unfortunately become self-fulfilling prophecies, contributing directly to achievement gaps. #, seen employment and career trajectories.
Okay, the workplace. This is where so many studies have been done, especially looking at that very first hurdle, getting your foot in the door. The resume study is probably the most famous and maybe the most shocking example here.
It really is a powerful demonstration because it controls for everything except the variable being tested, the implicit bias triggered by a name. Researchers create identical resumes, same qualifications, same experience, same education layout, but they just change the name at the top to sound typically white or typically Black.
And what happens?
The results are consistently stark. Resumes with white-sounding names receive significantly more callbacks for interviews, often around 50% more than the identical resumes with Black-sounding names. This classic study by Marianne Bertrand and Sendhil Mullainathan has been replicated many times across different fields, different cities.
50% more callbacks,
Yeah.
just based on a name. That's a massive, quantifiable barrier right at the start, triggered purely by an unconscious association.
Exactly. And that bias doesn't just stop once you get the interview, right? Affinity bias kicks in during the interview itself. Managers might unconsciously ask different questions or build more rapport with candidates who remind them of themselves.
And later on, performance reviews, promotions.
Attribution bias comes into play heavily there. As we discussed, successes of in-group members are attributed to skill, failures to bad luck. For out-group members, it's often reversed. Even if objective performance metrics are similar, the interpretation of that performance can be biased, affecting ratings, bonuses, and promotion opportunities.
So you miss out on a callback here, get a slightly lower performance rating there, get passed over for one promotion.
hmm
What's the cumulative effect over, say, a 20 or 30-year career?
It's enormous. The cumulative impact of many small, seemingly minor instances of bias across multiple decision points, hiring, assignments, evaluations, promotions, mentorship, creates substantial, often vast differences in career trajectories over time. It explains how people with similar starting potential can end up in very different places.
Yeah, and for the organization itself.
It's damaging, too. Unconscious bias reduces the diversity of talent and perspectives, which limits innovation and problem solving. It can create environments where people from underrepresented groups don't feel psychologically safe or valued, leading to higher turnover. Organizations literally pay a price in talent and performance for not managing these biases.
Okay, so the picture's pretty clear. This stuff is pervasive, it's measurable, and it causes real harm. The big question then is, what can we actually do about it? Can we rewire System 1? Is there a way to fight this cognitive habit?
Well, there's no magic wand, no simple bias off switch. But the most promising approach, backed by solid research, treats bias less like a fixed character flaw and more like a deeply ingrained mental habit. And like any habit, it requires sustained, conscious effort to manage or break.
This thinking comes largely from the work of Patricia Devine and her colleagues at the University of Wisconsin, right? Their intervention study is pretty famous in this field.
It is. It's considered a landmark because it showed that change is possible, but it takes work. Their prejudice habit-breaking intervention wasn't just about awareness. It combined awareness with generating concern about discrimination and then, critically, required participants to actively apply specific strategies over a sustained period. I think it was 12 weeks in the main study.
And what were the results? Did it actually reduce implicit bias?
Yes, significantly. Participants who went through the full intervention showed substantial reductions in their implicit racial bias scores, measured by the IAT, compared to control groups. And importantly, these reductions were still present when they were tested again weeks later. That lasting effect is rare in bias intervention studies. It showed that if you treat bias like breaking a bad habit, like quitting smoking or biting your nails, you can make real progress.
Okay, let's get practical. What are those specific strategies? Devine's model has 5 core ones, right? This feels like the toolkit people can actually use.
Exactly. And they all focus on forcing System 2, that effortful thinking, to get involved proactively rather than just letting System 1 run the show. The 5 are, first, stereotype replacement.
Okay, what's that?
That's recognizing when you have a stereotypical thought or reaction, that initial flash from System 1, catching it, labeling it as biased, and consciously replacing it with a non-stereotypical, value-consistent response.
Right.
It requires that ACC conflict detection we talked about.
Actively correcting yourself in the moment.
Right. Second is counter-stereotypic imaging. This is about actively visualizing or seeking out vivid examples of people from stereotyped groups who defy the stereotype.
Like consciously picturing female scientists or black CEOs.
Precisely. If your System 1 automatically links leader with male, you deliberately practice imagining successful female or non-binary leaders. Over time, this repeated mental exercise can actually start to weaken the old automatic association and build new ones. It's like retraining System 1's database.
Okay, third.
Individualization. This means making a conscious effort to see people as individuals rather than just members of a group. You deliberately seek out specific, unique information about them, their personal interests, experiences, skills, instead of relying on quick, group-based assumptions or stereotypes. It forces you past the System 1 categorization shortcut.
Makes sense.
Number 4, perspective taking. This involves actively trying to see the world from the viewpoint of someone from a stereotyped group, imagining their experiences, their feelings, their challenges. Research consistently shows this is incredibly powerful, not just for reducing bias, but for increasing empathy. And empathy is a strong predictor of less discriminatory behavior.
So putting yourself in their shoes, basically.
Essentially, yes. And finally, number 5 is increasing intergroup contact. This means deliberately seeking out positive interactions with people from different groups. But the key here, stressed in the research, is the quality of the contact. It needs to be positive, ideally cooperative, and on an equal footing. Just being physically near people from other groups isn't enough. The interaction itself matters.
Okay, those 5 strategies,
Yeah.
placement, imaging, individualization, perspective taking, contact, they sound effective, but also they require real effort. Success isn't guaranteed just by knowing them, right?
Absolutely not. Devine's work and subsequent studies clearly show that the effectiveness hinges critically on two things: the participants' genuine concern about prejudice and discrimination they have to want to change, and their active, sustained use of these strategies in their daily lives. It's not a one-time fix, it's ongoing mental work.
So motivation and practice are key.
Crucial. The people who were highly motivated and kept consciously applying the strategies were the ones who saw the most significant and lasting reductions in their implicit bias scores. It's like exercising a muscle. Hashtag tag tag B. What doesn't work? The limitations of awareness.
Okay, so if Devine's model represents the hard work, the sustained effort,
Yeah.
what about the easier path, the kind of thing many organizations do? Does just making people aware of unconscious bias work?
This is where the evidence gets pretty sobering. Simple awareness training interventions that basically just involve telling people about unconscious bias, maybe having them take an IAT and see their score, or sitting through a short educational session. These consistently show very limited effectiveness for creating sustained, long-term reduction in bias or changes in behavior.
So that mandatory 1-hour webinar on unconscious bias that everyone has to click through.
It might raise awareness that bias exists, which isn't nothing, but it generally fails to provide the practical tools, the motivation, or crucially, the sustained practice needed to actually manage or change those deep-seated habits.
It's like telling someone who smokes smoking is bad for you and then expecting them to quit without any further support or strategies.
That's a good analogy. Rigorous, systematic reviews of corporate diversity and bias training programs have found that most lack robust evaluation, and any positive effects they do show often fade away within weeks or months. Even the Federal Judicial Center reviewed the evidence for judges and concluded that programs aiming to reduce implicit bias generally have limited short-term effects.
So why do organizations rely on them so much?
Well, they're relatively easy to implement, they're scalable, they're often less expensive than deeper interventions, and perhaps cynically, they allow organizations to check a box and show they're doing something about diversity and inclusion, even if that something isn't particularly effective at changing underlying biases or behaviors. Awareness is just the first step, not the whole journey. Hashtag see systemic solutions in future science.
Okay, so if individual training, especially the light touch awareness kind, has such limitations, where should the focus be for creating real lasting change?
The research consensus is increasingly pointing towards organizational-level systemic interventions. These are changes to processes, structures, and policies that are designed to reduce the opportunity for bias to influence decisions in the first place.
So changing the system itself rather than just trying to change every individual person within it.
Exactly. The idea is that these systemic changes can be more powerful and reliable because they work, even if individuals' underlying implicit biases don't magically disappear. You're building guardrails against the bias.
What are some examples of these effective structural defenses?
They generally fall into a couple of main categories. First is implementing structured decision-making processes. This means replacing vague, subjective evaluation criteria with clear, specific, objective criteria that are defined before you start evaluating candidates or performance.
Like a standard rubric for interviews?
Precisely. For job interviews, for instance, it means asking every single candidate the exact same set of predetermined job-relevant questions and scoring their answers against a predefined rubric. This minimizes the chance for the interviewer's personal feelings, affinities, or biases to sway the assessment.
Makes sense. What's the other category?
Blind review procedures. This involves removing identifying information, names, photos, sometimes even clues about gender or school background during critical evaluation stages.
Like the famous orchestra auditions behind a screen.
That's the classic example. Applying that idea to resume reviews, application screening for university admissions, or even sometimes performance evaluations. By making the reviewer blind to demographic characteristics, you force them to evaluate based solely on the qualifications and merit presented, bypassing the triggers for common biases like racial or gender bias.
So structural fixes seem promising. Meanwhile, is the science still advancing in how we even study bias? Are we moving beyond just lab tests like the IAT?
Oh, absolutely. The cutting edge is moving towards studying bias in more natural, real-world contexts. Researchers are using technologies like mobile EEG, electroencephalogram, which allows measuring brain activity outside the lab, FNIRS, functional near-infrared spectroscopy, which is another portable brain imaging technique, and even hyperscanning.
Hyperscanning. What that?
That's where you simultaneously record the brain activity of two or more people while they are actually interacting with each other.
Whoa.
Yeah. So you can start to see the neural dynamics of bias playing out during a real conversation or collaboration. Identify those neural tipping points in real-time social interaction. It's about getting ecologically valid data, seeing bias operate in the wild, not just in controlled lab tasks.
Very cool. Okay, before we wrap up, we have to touch on a really important critique, sometimes called the bias. What's the concern there?
This is a crucial debate, especially in social justice circles. The critique is essentially that focusing too heavily on individual unconscious bias, framing discrimination primarily as a result of these unintentional cognitive flaws within individuals, might inadvertently distract us from tackling the bigger, arguably more impactful issues of structural racism and deliberate conscious discrimination.
So the worry is that it lets systems and explicit prejudice off the hook.
Kind of. Critics argue that if we locate the problem solely inside individual heads as an unconscious habit, it can minimize the role of discriminatory laws, policies, institutional practices, and frankly, old-fashioned intentional bigotry. It risks individualizing a systemic problem and potentially limits the push for the large-scale structural reforms that are necessary to dismantle inequality at its roots. It's a vital tension in the field how to address both the subtle cognitive biases and the overt systemic ones. Hashtag hack outro. Hashtag tag aid. Key takeaways summary.
Okay, that was a deep dive indeed. Let's try to consolidate the key intelligence briefings from today. 3 main takeaways. Yeah, let's do it. First, the dual nature of bias. We've got these two systems. Unconscious biases operate automatically through System 1. They're pervasive. The IET data suggests about 3/4 of people show them, and critically, they often run counter to our conscious values, our System 2 beliefs.
Second, real-world harm. These aren't just theoretical concepts. Implicit biases cause concrete, measurable harm across vital sectors. We saw it in healthcare, leading to differential treatment, and in employment with that huge resume callback gap. The impact is real and documented.
And third, it's a habit, not a quick fix. Lasting change isn't about a single training session. It requires sustained effort, like breaking any habit. This means using deliberate strategies, like those 5 from Patricia Devine's model, and implementing systemic structural changes in organizations like structured interviews and blind reviews. Simple awareness just doesn't cut it for long-term change. Hashtag B. Big picture and provocative question.
So the big picture here seems to be that tackling this fundamental aspect of how our minds work really demands a two-pronged attack. On one hand, sustained, highly motivated individual effort to manage our own System 1 impulses.
Using those habit-breaking techniques.
Right. And on the other hand, driving systematic changes in our organizations and institutions to build environments where bias has fewer opportunities to influence outcomes.
Okay, so here's the final thought we want to leave you, the listener, with. It pulls back to where these biases come from in the first place, the culture. If our implicit associations are shaped so powerfully by the society we swim in, maybe even more than by our personal beliefs,
Yeah.
then how far can individual effort really take us? How much can we change ourselves before we need to fundamentally change the cultural environment, the media we consume, the institutions we build, the social messages constantly bombard us, the very things that plant the seeds of bias to begin with?
That's the deep question, isn't it? Where does individual responsibility end and collective cultural change need to take over? The investigation definitely continues. Thanks for diving deep with us today.